In this lesson, we'll talk about localization. Mi no habla español, which means I don't speak Spanish, as you might be able to tell from the accent. A lot of other people do, however, and there are more non-English speakers than English speakers in the world. If your app is to be used worldwide, you might want to take this into account. Localization is the act of making an application appropriate for the locale it's being used in. This may mean language translations, differing images and icons, perhaps even different content. If you have written .NET applications, you may already be familiar with the idea of using resources to support localization. Android does it a bit differently, but the concept is the same. We'll use different resources for different locales. Let's take a look at the app we're going to be building. I've created a layout which has an image of the United States map. We're going to be doing this in English and Spanish, so I would like this map to actually be of Spain for the Spanish language version. And then I have a text label and a button. The button is going to pop up a little warning message. And there's the title bar area, which you can't see in the designer, which gives the name of the application. All of these resources are created nicely in English, which does not help us for the Spanish version. But if we take a little deeper look at the XML, we can see that for our image view, we're using a resource called map. Now we're familiar with the idea of having resources in the drawable, and there's a map PNG in the drawable directory. But note, I've added a drawable-es directory, and it also has a map, and that little preview gives you the idea that that's a map of Spain. So we can separate our resources by using a little hyphen with a country code. Now Android has a little bit different country codes than you may be familiar with in .NET, so you'll probably take a look at the documentation to get the correct code. For the text view, we also, instead of using just straight text, we've got a little @string in front of it, which indicates that it should use the string resource. And those are in values. When I take a look at the string resource, my exit label carries along this text. I also have a values.es, which are the string resources that are going to be used in Spanish. And I reproduce the exit label, but this time I use a Spanish translation. I'm going to apologize up front for the translations. This is from a Babelfish automatic translation. This is probably not what you want to do for a production application. You probably want a real human to translate things to get proper syntax. Back to our resource. We also had the button. And again, the text uses a string resource for exit. And there's our exit in English and our exit in Spanish. When we go to the activity, if you remember, there's an attribute right on the activity called the label, which is the text that is shown up in the title bar. And normally we just have a straight text string, but in this case we've put in @string, which again tells it to use a string resource. And the string resource's name is application name. In this case it's localization for English, and I'm not going to pronounce that in Spanish, my apologies. On the button click, we're going to do a little toast message, and we're going to do a warning. We'll again use a string resource called exit warning in English and Spanish. So, now that we've got all of those resources set up, we'd like to actually see them in action. If you go to the device, or the emulator in my case, we can go, at least in the emulator, there's a nice little application called Custom Locale. On the device you would go into the settings and the language settings. The custom locale allows me to easily set my device to use Spanish. And you can see some of the applications are localized, like contacts and camera and calendar. Now let's run our application. And you can see our title bar is indeed in Spanish. We got our map of Spain. Our label is in Spanish. Our button is in Spanish. And when I click the button, my warning message is in Spanish. So now I have a localized application, and I didn't really do anything in code. I did it all with resources. So this demonstrates how to use localized resources. The hardest part is actually using a resource when it's just easier to type in a string directly. If you do that, you'll spend twice the time searching for strings that don't have resources that must be localized later on. This likely will happen just before release, so please save yourself the trouble and set up the resources up front.